We are coming to you days after India has successfully landed the Chandrayaan's Vikram lander on the moons, and the Pragyan rover is already looking at the lunar surface, bringing us data from the moon. And as we say, that science never really stops. So we are here to talk about the next development from the Principal Scientific Advisor's office. The draft of the National Deep Tech Startup Policy was published for public consultations, and with me I have the Principal Scientific Advisor, Dr. Ajay Sood, who is going to give us some insights into what deep tech is, what this policy really means, and the way forward for the startups in India. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us today. And of course, the country is waiting to hear from you about the Chandrayaan mission as well. So, how do you feel? What do you think about it?
See, this is a wonderful moment. I mean, it's really a moment which all of us cherish. And the topic which you mentioned, the deep tech startup and the space exploration, are so intimately connected. So I am glad that this is happening now when we have this enormous excitement, not only in scientific community but in the entire society and also across the world, because we have been able to do this feat, achieve this momentous achievement at a very fraction of a cost. Right. Now, how we do it, this is an exercise in itself to learn how the India's space program has been evolving for more than 50 years. Of course, now coming to this stage. So, all these things takes time. Right. Now, in the context of space, you know that space policy has come out and it has opened up space for private sector, for industries, for startups. Right. And the startups in this domain are in fact deep tech startups. Right. So what is a deep tech startup? If you need to put a definition for the sake of it, not that it is very hard and fast, any startup which is based on significant scientific discovery or engineering innovation will be termed as deep tech startup. Right. Not only the business innovation model, which of course is a very good thing, but that may not come in this. Right. So we can have many examples. Space is one example, as I mentioned, but we also have quantum revolution happening as we speak. Right. Quantum communication, quantum computing, quantum sensors, medical devices, and you name it. Right. Because there are so many areas now where artificial intelligence, since it is so often occurring, I tend to forget and assume that it is always there. Right. AI is really making all the difference now. So the deep tech startups have been happening in our country and abroad, but the numbers have been less than what would be desirable for a country which want to advance technologically at a much faster pace.
Right, right. So essentially we are talking about companies that are based on some innovation, some science or a research that is not easily reproducible,
is reproducible, but the point is you have to have a niche in certain points which is a scientific advance, so which you are doing first time, or you are doing it in a unique way. Because startups have to be successful. For that, their product must have a uniqueness, and it should have also the cost advantage. So both the things have to be together, and it will not happen if it is already well thrashed out. So you need that scientific advancement in taking your idea forward.
Right, and to understand, the importance of having these kind of startups is we should look at ISRO's success to begin with. The contribution is not just from ISRO scientists, but also researchers from different public institutions, as well as industrial companies who have manufactured products, who have worked on softwares. So it is a whole ecosystem that needs to
That's
come
right.
together. Now my question is that we already have a lot of incubation centers that are attached to research institutions in India. We have the Atal Innovation Centers, and a lot of like the IITs also have sort of cracked the model of turning a research idea into a viable business or a startup. So why are you feeling the need to focus on deep tech, separately and come out with a separate policy for it?
So actually, if you look at the incubation centers, many of the incubation centers have deep tech startups because they want to be in the whole vicinity of where technology is getting developed. So now the deep tech policy which we are talking about is really looking at what are the gaps in our India startup policy, which is already there. But that policy, when it was drafted, it would not have taken into account all the excitement and the progress which has happened in technology based startups.
Right.
It looked in the totality, which is a good thing. The reason you can say it's a success is that from a very small number, we have almost like 100,000 startups this year, and more than 100 you have unicorns. So that startup policy is doing great. There is no issue about it. But in deep tech business, there is something more you need.
Right.
Because what you also need is sustained funding, and a funding for in a very long term way.
Right.
You also need the IP related issues. How do you make it simpler?
Right.
How do you enable our inventors to really go very quickly to a next phase, to the next TRL level and the next TRL level, so that it can be a product very soon in the market, or it is ready to be given to a bigger company.
Right.
That also is acceptable.
Right. Right.
So all these things require a very nimble and agile system. So the startups provide us with that, and the incubation centers, what you mentioned, is a welcome step. It will encourage the deep tech startups.
Right. So, you mentioned IP, so I'll just ask, we as a country, why do we see, our IP registrations not increase to that desirable level? Is it just about not having those innovations, or is the process very tedious? What do you think?
See, it is mix of both actually. See, the point is, earlier we did not have a patenting culture in India, because we were just doing something and leaving it and maybe publishing it, but we were never protecting the intellectual rights. So some of it is historical.
Right.
Now all that is now getting understood, and people are very agile, if I can use that word, to really patent their intellectual might, intellectual inputs. So it has increased over the years. If you look at the numbers, which was about 45,000 in 2016 and 17, has gone to 66,000 as applications.
Right.
And the granting number has also increased from almost 10,000 in this period to almost 30,000. So there is an increase, you can say a factor of 3 over in the last maybe 5 years. This is a good growth, but it has to go further.
Right.
So to answer you, I will say this IP culture is coming. Also, more than IP, you have to also remember you have to actually monetize it, because IP is just a first step.
Right.
But if you are not able to monetize it, actually it doesn't work for you.
Right.
So all that has to be understood by our researchers.
It doesn't work for you, and it does nothing for the public also.
It doesn't. Actually, it is quite a drain
Yes.
on the system, because you have to maintain the patents. So the idea should be, you have to very, very carefully evaluate your discovery or your invention, your innovation, scientific innovation. How will it look in the marketplace?
Right.
What will it do? Will it bring a new technology? Will it bring a new process? Will it be a game changer? Then only you see. If it is a very derivative kind of an invention, it will not see the success.
Right, right.
So the deep tech has to be understood deeply in evaluating what exactly will really go in a market domain and be successful.
Right. So who is doing this evaluation? Who will be doing the evaluation?
So this has to be done at the inventors level, because inventors have to be very kind of clinical about it in evaluating it, not emotional about it.
Right.
Because when you have an invention, everyone thinks it's the best invention.
Right, that is true.
And everyone thinks they are Einsteins. Okay, reality is not that. We have to be very carefully evaluate what is this invention,
Right.
how will it change things in relation to what is really expected by the public, society, and where it can create a market. See, supposing you have an invention, you may not have a product in the market along that line.
Right.
That's a great thing, but you have to also create a demand for it.
Right.
You have to create the appetite for it. So all this has to be done in a team manner. So the person who invents may not have all the knowledge or the information or enthusiasm, but a team effort can be done.
Right.
And our policy talks for Center for Deep Tech. I think what we called it some name, Center for Deep Tech Translation.
Right.
Translation. That is the kind of thing we want.
Okay.
So supposing you have a center, can it enable that? Because all the inventors, all the scientists may not have that acumen to look at the marketplace.
Right.
May not have.
Right.
I'm not saying it is missing, but may not have with everyone. Now this Center for Deep Tech Translation, the concept which we are suggesting, has to see, can it bridge that gap?
Right.
Now how that center will come, what we will do has to evolve.
Right. Right.
But the gaps in our system which is preventing the increase of deep tech startups, as you know that about 1/10 of the startups you may call that as a deep tech. There is no hard and fast definition, but if you look at all the areas of quantum, AI, medical, diagnostic instruments, all that, if you some nanotechnology, all that if you sum up it, about 1/10 of our startups.
Right.
How can this center increase this?
Right, right.
So that's the goal.
In fact, like for the longest time, we often used to talk about how it's not that we didn't have the capacity for research or solving a lot of our problems in our public institutions. It was just that there was no incentive or no training among scientists to turn that into something viable. So these innovations would just sit in the lab then.
Yeah.
Right. Next, coming to the process through which this policy was developed, you have spoken to stakeholders, you've had workshops with deep tech startups. So what were some of the points that really came up during this process?
So it was a very, very interactive process. So we did not want to sit in a room and write down the policy and say this is what it is. No. Actually, 230 consultations almost were done to understand what are the issues and what are the aspirations. So various stakeholders were interviewed, and there were town hall meetings and so on. So what came out was that there are issues with the facilities which are available for deep tech startups, because deep tech startups will also need high-end scientific instruments.
Right.
It's not easy for them to invest, because startups are really on a very frugal budget. How do we enable that? So for example, our office has initiated a very novel program called iSTEM, whereas what we have done is all the instruments, high-end instruments funded by central government agencies, we have the data about them. They are on the website, and people can book the time on that, and on a very nominal payment can access. Now that platform is available to startups now. So these are the kind of interventions which are required, which came out in our consultation. Then of course the possibility how government can help in the funding. Can we have funds of funds? What can we do? The startup policy is already there, you know, the India startup policy. So we have suggested, if you have seen our draft, we have also suggested what should be done in over and above the present policy. That document also we have, it may or may not be in public domain, but we have actually worked on it and see that if you can supplement the existing policies with little more, it will help the deep tech in a big way.
You know, your point about providing access to these startups to, you know, look at, to use the instruments that already have been bought with public money, right? These are all sitting in institutions, not always working perhaps. And so this is like creating a library where someone can go and use another. And one of the points that this policy also covers is access to, you know, marginal sections of the society, and also you know, one point that really stood out for me was incentivizing venture capitalists for women-led startups. So how are you, you know, proposing that this would be done? Because as far as I know, a venture capitalist is free to, you know, choose where they, and because we have an inherent bias in the society, we tend to, such capitalists tend to invest more in male-led companies.
See, this is a very complex problem. It is not only in the deep tech startup. We have to encourage women-led innovations in all fields, whether it is in deep tech or otherwise. So women empowerment is critical to the progress of a country. It just cannot do when you neglect 50% of your population. All that is a realization which is completely understood now by our leadership, and many efforts are being made. Now in the startup ecosystem which you mentioned, we have to incentivize that. Now there are various ways to incentivize. Can we have certain schemes like the way we have some schemes in Department of Science and Technology for women scientists? Can we also have some startup resources reserved for women entrepreneurs? On small scale it's happening in few schemes, but can they be amplified? Then we can have, for example, in Center for Deep Tech Translation, which we mentioned, we should make a cell in that so that it reaches out to women entrepreneurs and bring them in a proactive manner. See, reactive is one aspect which we have been doing, but we need to be now proactive and promote that.
Absolutely. In fact, a lot of research suggests that women often hesitate from stepping up, and, you know, despite having the capability of having very good ideas, often don't speak up. So I think that's where this comes in. But also, interestingly, there's another point which mentions, you know, monitoring the diversity within these deep tech startups. So how do you propose to do that? Because again, this is, all these startups will be independent of the government.
So that is the very important thing which you said. See, our goal should be to make policy interventions in a way which is friendly to the system. We cannot do top down. Top down never works. And when it is startup, the whole principle of startups is that it is very much decentralized. Now the way we can do is we can incentivize. We can say that if in your startup team, if you have X percentage of gender parity, then it will have certain brownie points. Because brownie points is something which people understand. So we can put brownie points for that. We can also say that if your product deals with something related to women or other marginalized society, it will have some brownie points. So what we need to do, we don't have to really tell them do this, but instead of that we have to create the right conditions and the right atmosphere and some incentives so that they think like that.
Right.
And my feeling is if we do that in the beginning, in next maybe 5 years, it may not be even needed when it will become a level playing field.
Right. That's actually a very fresh perspective of looking at diversity and not just, encouraging women leaders, but also making sure that at the startup level also there is equal opportunity for all. The program also talks about a tenured exchange program for women in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So not just looking at metro cities where people have better opportunities, but also going to such areas. So why was there like a special focus for tier 2 and tier 3?
See, if you look at our system, tier 1 institutes fortunately have understood the importance of startups and they are doing well. It doesn't mean that tier 2 and tier 3, this name is a bit odd, but let's call it the people who didn't have such much access.
Right.
It's not when you say 1, 2, 3, it almost somehow brings some grading. It is not that intention. The point is that those people have not been exposed to the possibilities which are available to us. Now, by doing that consciously, we will really enlarge the system. See, right now you are using hardly 10 to 15% of our workforce or our intellectual capabilities, engineering prowess, all that we are using only a small fraction. A very large fraction is in the other cities, smaller cities. And good news is that if you look at the startups, already a good fraction of them are in tier 2 and tier 3. In the other startups, which I mentioned is about 100,000 startups. A good fraction is in tier 2 and tier 3. So it's not that they are out of the system. We want to take deep tech startups also in tier 2 and tier 3. And that can only happen if they get the facilities to take their scientific innovations to the marketplace. And as I said, the facilities available and making the connection with people, all that can be done in a conscious manner for the first few years, and then it will take up.
Right. Now, there is a point in the policy about about mapping critical minerals. So now, what is critical minerals in terms of deep tech, and what exactly are we looking at here?
See, critical minerals means these are the metals which are indispensable. For example, if you talk of lithium ion battery, for example, you know that lithium is necessary. You also know cobalt is necessary. You also know nickel is necessary in the anodes, cathodes and anodes. Now, for other technologies, not lithium ion battery, something else, rare earth magnets will be necessary. Because rare earth magnets have a property that in a very small volume, you can get very high magnetic field. So, in a very small magnet, it will be a huge magnetic strength. Now, they are samarium, cobalt, iron, boron, like that there are not iron, boron, but dysprosium based magnets and so on. These are critical minerals. So, the rare earths elements are critical minerals. Similarly, as I mentioned, cobalt is rare earth. Similarly, if you talk of not even metals, even helium-3 is a critical material, because if you need quantum computers which are based on superconducting junctions, you need dilution fridge. Now, dilution fridge needs helium-3. So that is again a critical, I would call, element.
Right.
So like
That's
that,
because it's a non-reactive.
some of them are reactive, some are not, but they are not in very large supply.
Right.
The supply is limited. You know, lithium is limited. That's why people are worried whether we can depend our economy on lithium ion battery. That's why you have other electrochemistries now being discussed, sodium ion battery and so on. So critical minerals, depending on the field, will be different, but rare earth ones I told you, and few transition metals and other elements which are critical in lithium and so on are required. Now in startups, if they are based on technology and they need these critical minerals, they can be quite expensive, and there can be a supply chain issue.
Right.
So one has to also attempt to do that.
Right. So same question for strategic materials. What is what does that mean, and where does that come in?
So strategic materials are also mixed with the critical minerals, because any material which is useful in strategic applications is important. Now again, there can be a whole lot of materials where the technology is for strategic sector. Now I must tell you, there is a very thin dividing line between civil sector and strategic sector. These two are not very widely different. So whatever is being needed for strategic sector is also needed for civil sector.
Right.
So this whole idea of supply chain of strategic materials, critical minerals, and other semiconducting chips and the systems, they are all important.
Right.
And the totality of that is needed in terms of success of any deep tech startup.
So now coming to the whole ecosystem of things, why is it that we are looking at developing more startups instead of, say, focusing our energies to sort of promote R&D in either existing companies or even institutions like the DRDO or the ISRO? So what is the thought there?
See, the startups is a very key vehicle of innovation and entrepreneurship, and the whole concept is based on a very agile and nimble system. It does not have all the nitty-gritty details of a big company and so on, because there is an appetite to take risk in that sector.
Right. It's very flexible also.
It's very flexible. Now the point is, this flexibility one can use to your advantage to get results in a time period which will not be possible otherwise, because the systems are, it's called in physics moment of inertia.
Right.
So you have so much inertia in the system that any change you want to do takes a long time.
Right.
Whereas in startup, if you know that this is not working, you change your course. And very often when people start these deep tech startups, or startups for that matter, the idea with which they started is not necessarily the idea which will end up in marketing.
Right.
Now that agility cannot happen in big companies. Also, our government system and all will have their own systems and processes in place, but now they are actually using the startup strength, like IDEX, which you know that in the defense. In fact, they are using this deep tech startups in a very effective manner.
Right. In fact, like a lot of the process in, like I said in the beginning, in the Chandrayaan mission, in all our space missions also do capitalize on startups. We're coming to the end of this conversation. So what is it right now that you're expecting from the public? So the draft policy is also already up on the Principal Scientific Advisor's official website, and we will link it down in the description below as well. But what are your expectations from the public?
So what we wanted was that this is not a document prepared by few people and put for implementation. enormous work has gone in, and we have come out with certain suggestions and so on. We wanted public to see if we have missed some critical steps, if we have missed out on some areas which we have not delineated. Now the policy cannot be, let's say, 100% complete at any stage. So what I want to say is that this policy will be dynamic in nature. We should revisit this policy maybe after some time, maybe 1 year, maybe 2 years down the line, and learn from the experience. So it cannot be a static document. So what we would expect, I think the 15th September, when we want to wind up for this consultation and come out with the almost like a final draft, we would like to see what are your suggestions which we have missed out, and maybe in certain areas, supposing we have missed out which is not applicable to them, you need special provisions, for example in quantum, for example, what can we do? So many things will be common to many areas, but it is likely that some very high-end deep tech technologies may need some special intervention. So that is the goal of this public consultation.
That is very exciting. I'm sure there will be a lot of comments and feedback on this, and we look forward to seeing how this policy takes shape and what it means in the coming years for our country and for the different institutions, public institutions that are also involved in the process of research and development. Thank you so much, Dr. Sood, for joining us today, and thank you for joining us. Do tell us in the comment section what you thought of this discussion, and do go and look at the draft policy and see if you can also contribute to this policy making.
Thank you.
Do continue to follow us on all our social media platforms for the latest news updates. I am Mohana Basu, Assistant Editor at ThePrint, and behind the camera there's Mahira Khan.